This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu has held the second edition of the UK-Nigeria Security Defence Partnership Dialogue in Abuja. Both parties discussed defence cooperation, countering terrorism, violent extremism, organised crime and illicit financial flows. They also touched on enhancing maritime security. As Nigeria continues to grapple with a multi-layered security challenge, questions arise on what this dialogue means for the country. Joining us to discuss this today is security analyst Adamu Kabir. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Kabir.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's start off. I mean, this is the second edition of this dialogue. I wonder what you expect out of it, especially if we look at what the first one was and what sort of gains we made from it.
The UK has a very advanced national security strategy and structure. The fact that for a very long time they've had a good relationship with Nigeria. As far as I know, a British military technical assistance team has been embedded in our national defense headquarters for more than 20 to probably 30 years. And we're still having the challenge that we have at the moment. It's not giving me any hope for any better or improved relationship between the two. What is more important, I think, is for Nigeria to organize itself and be very conscious of what it wants. In other words, what does it hope to achieve from its engagement with this country? As long as your national policy is not as stable as it should be, then unfortunately you're not going to get anything out from a foreign partner. In other words, we need to be certain about what we want from our engagement in this country. I already mentioned that we already have a British military assistance for more than 30 years, if I'm right. And look at where we are at the moment. So international relations are all about interest. If we agree what we want out of those relationships and we go after it, then it will be more beneficial. I'm not seeing enough of that at the moment. So this meeting, despite the fact that it's a very good platform to move forward some of our national interest, the fact that we've not really marshaled out what that national interest is and how we need to get it out from our foreign partners, unfortunately, I'm not as optimistic as I should be.
Mr. Kabir, is it possible for you to identify what exactly the UK's interest in a peaceful Nigeria, a secure Nigeria is?
It is Section 14, Section 2 of the Constitution. It's very clear. It is the provision of security for every Nigerian and the protection of his property. So where the mindset of our political class office holders do not seem to appreciate this point, and I say this with all sense of responsibility. When the revised national security strategy was introduced in 2019, the intention was to have a paradigm shift from the current approach, which is state-centric, to a human-centric approach to security that would look beyond the provision of just physical security to health security, to food security, cyber security, name them. But in reality, very little of that has been implemented. And my point is that even up until this stage, we're not seeing any conscious effort. The strategy is still bottom down. I haven't seen any conscious effort by our leaders to generate the requirement of Nigerians bottom to up, so that you, as a journalist, I, as a security practitioner, am able to contribute towards the marshalling of that national interest that I've mentioned. So in essence, while the provision is very clear, the implementation is almost lacking, next to nothing, frankly.
So, Mr. Kabir, I'm interested in some of the perceptions that we've had about Nigeria's commitment or Nigeria's seriousness when these foreign partners offer military support. You noted that the UK has been embedded for decades now. They've got at least way better security strategy than we do. I remember when the US also offered, and it was the same criticism of us and our government, even from a Nigerian's perspective. Much of the conversations from the UK, especially from the first dialogue, was around human rights and just improving that across the board. If it seems like we're unserious, are these dialogues a waste of time?
So first off, they don't have to be a waste of time. They're a very good platform for getting both bilateral and sometimes multilateral support. For lack of a better word, I'm using support now more liberally. If you don't engage, if you don't sit down, then it will be probably a little bit difficult for you to get what you want. But where the challenge is what do you go to those engagements with? Are you going to do? They are pursuing their interests. They want improved human rights. They want transparency. They want security sector governance. They want security sector reform. So they would come to you with all of these things. But what do we want as a country? As an example, we want improved training. We want equipment. We want strategy. We want tactics. We want all the prerequisites that would make transfer of technology possible. But do we go to those meetings with this kind of mash-out ideas to say, okay, this is our challenge? I mean, if you, as a Nigerian, as an expert in the security sector, I know what our challenge is. I don't need an outsider to come and tell me what the challenge is. I also know what I need to solve that challenge. So do we go to those meetings with this type of strategies, with this type of expectations? I doubt. One of the videos that came out not too long ago showed one of the top government officials begging, I'm sorry to say, in a very condescending manner. That's not what I expect to see in those type of engagements. We're a country of over 200 million persons. We have our strength when we sit down for this type of negotiations. We have a voice in a continent that is over 53 countries that the entire world is trying to covet. So if we marshal our ideas and marshal our thoughts and sit down as partners, not as beggars. I mentioned that video showed a very condescending, posture. And that's not where you go in international, bilateral, and multinational relations. You put your strengths down. You also put your weaknesses, and in a very strategic conversation, you offer what you have, and you also, in a very clear manner, state what you expect. And more importantly, there should be a monitoring and evaluation framework that would allow you to assess the kind of engagement you have with this partner. The beauty of the international relations is that if a partner A is not conceding to your request, there's always a partner B, and that's why the world order as it is right now has the US on the one hand and some Western countries, and then you've got China, you've also got to an extent Russia. My point is that we should be able to assess this engagement over time to ask ourselves our own interests, match out interests. Are we getting them? If we're not getting them, what are we doing wrong? What should we do differently to get those things? I'm not seeing that at the moment.
Well, Mr. Kabir, I want to thank you for your time and for your analysis on the conversation this morning. Our guest is Adamu Kabir, a security analyst and CEO of Beacon Consulting, speaking to us on the second edition of the UK-Nigeria Security Defence Partnership Dialogue, which held in Abuja yesterday.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
And elsewhere on today in the news, the All Progressives Congress has defended President Bola Ahmed Tinubu over the rash of criticisms thrown his way by Nigerians and members of the opposition parties. The APC's publicity secretary, Mr. Felix Morka, believes that it is too soon to judge the performance of the president, as his administration has not been in place for up to a year. The APC equally asked that opposition party leaders give ideas to the president to help save the country. Now, all of this is happening at a time when Nigerians have been protesting the high cost of living in Kano and Niger states. Joining us this morning is political analyst Mr. Jide Ojo. Mr. Ojo, good morning and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to.
Yes, sir. To begin with, what is your reaction to the APC's defense of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, specifically the defense that it is a little too soon to criticize the president for the state of the economy?
I don't know what Felix Moka is saying, but I do understand that he has to defend his position as the publicity secretary of the ruling All Progressive Congress. But I know he lives in Nigeria. And he should understand that people definitely have lost patience with the administration of Bola Tinubu. He asked for the job, and he said we should not pity him. I mean, these are his words. He said Nigerians should not pity him because he asked for the job. So if we criticize him, it's in order, because this is not what we bargained for. I mean, we were rising cost of living under Buhari, quite all right, but not this bad. I mean, things have moved from bad to worse. And there doesn't seem to be any hope in the horizon. You see the rise, in fact, one of the newspapers said the technique of kidnapping. You know, it's not like the fastest way to make money now, going to kidnapping. When will people want to do that? Daily rise, the rise of cost of living. So if he says it's the opposition parties that are sponsoring this protest, he has another, I mean, he needs to have himself examined. I believe very strongly that, I mean, the president in all of his speeches have been pleading with Nigerians to bear with him. And that is quite in order. But not to start with one thing and passing the ball, oh, it's the opposition that wants to bring down the government. No. The president, even as late as a sports broadcast in 2024, acknowledged, because each of these speeches are analyzed in my column in the Punch. And I knew the president himself knew that the situation is far from what he pledged to Nigeria. Look at the exchange rate, for instance. Has that become the issue of Nigeria, where Naira will exchange, Naira to dollar was over 1,400. And look at the rising cost of, food. Yesterday, I learned the president had the emergency meeting on food security. And these are all interrelated. I know in your last conversation, you talked about security. Now, farmers cannot access their farms, and those who can access their farms have to pay access fees, they have to pay harvest fees. Is that what the country will bargain for?
Mr. Ojo,
I'm not partisan. I do not belong to any political party, but I really will not commend this administration for the state of affairs.
So, Mr. Ojo, let me ask you this, right? One of the protests occurred in Niger State, as you know, and I mean, the news says that some of the women who were involved were arrested. About 25 of them continue to be in detention, as at the last time that we checked. This was a protest at state level, right? And yet it's the APC at national level that's speaking as if the criticism is directed solely and completely at the president. What are your thoughts on how the apparatus of the party across the subnational level should respond to this?
Really speaking, Nabila, I think that's the problem. So, Felix Moka wants to protect his seat. He needs to rise up to the occasion, and all the media analysts have to say something to defend the indefensible. The right thing to do now is to correct the errors of governance. Right now, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's women they could arrest in Niger. And by the way, should I say that Niger State is an APC state? You can understand that, because Kano is an MPP, so maybe the state government wants to discredit the administration. Nobody is discrediting this administration. We all go to the same market, and we have a right to protest. In fact, I believe that civil society organizations should rise up and defend the of Niger State that were detained as a result of protest, because protest is legit. It's legitimate tool for expressing your human rights. We are running a country of rights, and you cannot arrest somebody because they legitimately protest against hardship. This protest is not limited to Nigeria. Almost all other African countries have been recording one protest or the other. Even in Europe, in France, people have protested. In Middle East, people have been protesting. In many of the European countries, in Germany, in UK, people have gone on strike. In US, people have gone on strike. Truck drivers at some point, they went on strike for weeks. Even people in the same industry. So protest is internationally recognized. Nigeria signed on to 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I believe that the National Human Rights Commission, the NGOs who are operating in Nigeria should rise in defense of these women who are wrongfully arrested. Because they were not caught with cordials, they were having a peaceful protest, and it is within their right. So they did not vandalize anything. They just went on the streets to show their displeasure. There is no basis for their arrest in the first place. But whatever it is, I think the Dr. Umar Gandhi should call his lapdogs to order. And all of those women arrested in Niger State should be released forthwith without any further delay. Why will you criminalize protest? It's within their civil rights to do so. In as far as it's peaceful, they did not destroy anything. They were not found with any arms and ammunition. So there is no basis for their arrest in the first place.
Mr. Ojo, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Our guest, Mr. Jide Ojo, is a political analyst, and he joined us to speak on the APC's defense of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, specifically their statement that it is too early to criticize the administration as they have not been in office for up to a year. The conversation continues this morning on Now Breakfast. Up next, we keep up with the National Assembly in just a few moments. Do stay with us.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM.
A very good morning to you and welcome back into the conversation. It is still Now Breakfast on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos, but we turn our sights from all that we've spoken about so far to bring you our update of matters in the legislative chambers. Keeping up with the National Assembly is where we are this morning, and our conversation is with our friends over at Order Paper. We're speaking with Mr. Daniel Oputa this morning. Mr. Oputa, good morning and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Pardon us, that's Mr. David Oputa. Let's dive right into it, right? I mean, we've got the National Assembly getting into full swing, and you yourself have noted some of the things that are up for discussion, including an amendment to the Electoral Act. We're also looking at stiffer penalties for kidnappers. These are some of the things that you've raised. So let's dive into it and speak to us about the highlights of the week.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Nigerians. Yesterday was a great day to be a Nigerian. And the National Assembly, I think the biggest issue this week is the amendment to the Electoral Act, just like you have mentioned, amongst other bills and motions and the actions that have been taken already. But so far, so good this week. This amendment to the Electoral Act coming on the heels of the last election they held last year, So there are about 5 things that the sponsor of this amendment is pushing for, and so the first thing is that INEC have to carry out a re-registration exercise for all eligible voters in preparation for the next elections every 10 years. So the way it happens now is when the election is to happen, they just update the voter registration. But this guy is saying now you have to do the whole process again every 10 years. People have said that the INEC register is not usually updated. So I think this is his own solution to that problem. And then the second part, another amendment is that the presidential election, National Assembly election, State Assembly election, and gubernatorial elections are to be held on the same day. These elections will be conducted on the same day. Before now, you would have the presidential and the national elections first, and then a fortnight, you now have the states and gubernatorial elections. But now, this lawmaker wants everything to be conducted on the same day. Is this feasible? Is this a better solution to what is already existing, well, it's left for the House to decide what they think. And then another thought amendment is card reader, the issue of the card reader. So in the last elections, people were accredited even when the card reader did not pick them up. But this time around, this lawmaker is saying that when people want to vote, you come with your INEC voters registration card, and then the card reader has to read it. If the card reader is unable to read it, you are not eligible to vote. Let me read specifically where it says, where the process of accreditation specified in subsection 2 above fails, such a voter is automatically disqualified from voting. That is to say, no accreditation, no voting. Now, I know definitely that this will not fly. This will raise lots of issues, especially in the northern part of the country and many areas where there seem to be network issues, So if the card reader does not read my card, why don't you go ahead with the manual? Although he's arguing that using that manual process allows rigging, that's where people who have died, people who are unable to come to vote by themselves, that's where they, wriggle them in and then cast votes for them. But card reader, accreditation, or nothing, I think this one will be highly debatable. You were going to say something?
So Puta, I want to draw on just your time observing the National Assembly, right? The Electoral Act typically has quite a few amendments that are sponsored by different lawmakers, and typically they're all at the same time. Some of them will be at different levels. This one scaled second reading, I believe. There's still the hurdle to cross about whether the president will sign it or not, if at all we see both chambers agree to these amendments. So that's actually what I want to get from you. What you think are the chances of the bill as is, the proposed amendment as it is, because you've only mentioned your thoughts on just one of those, one clause within it. So what are your thoughts on whether it will scale through completely?
So I think just like you said, this is the second reading. It's still going to go to a committee stage before coming back to the House of the Committee of the Vote. I think that when it gets to the committee stage, some parts of this amendment will be edited or removed, especially the part of this no accreditation, no voting. I am sure it will not fly. Some other parts of the amendments collapsing the elections into one day and all that. In fact, even says that a huge penalty for those who bring frivolous petitions to the electoral courts, that could fly. But as it is, the amendment as proposed by Honorable Wave, I'm not sure everything will fly, especially the no accreditation, no voting. By the time it gets to committee of all the other lawmakers are going to tear that part to pieces, I can tell you. And then that part will either be removed or edited or left as it was. And then by the time it gets to the president, I'm sure the House as it is right now and the executive, they have very perfect synergy. Remember that the chief of staff to the president used to be the speaker of the House of Assembly. So there's that perfect synergy. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Oputa, what other important motions can we take note of from this week's plenary?
The Senate, so far this week, it's been motions of urgent importance, motions of urgent importance. But from the Senate, I think they were looking at, on the second reading, a bill for the establishment of NYSC Trust Fund. That has been a pressing issue for a while. NYSC corpers have always complained about delayed in salary, and then there's been that issue of how to fund that service. And so now there's a motion in the second reading that for the establishment of an NYSC trust fund, whereby I think 0.1% of government revenue will just be allocated to the NYSC. And so the funding issues of NYSC will be solved. I think that's a motion that, because people have also called for the scrapping of NYSC, and now this is a motion that seeks to establish the workings of the NYSC. So there's going to be lots of interventions left and right on this particular motion, motion bill. Yeah, but it's in the second reading and the Senate. I saw something also on the Child Rights Act. That's on its first reading. So far, there's been lots of abuses of children. There's a case somewhere in the southeast of a woman who used iron and all of that on the child. And so the Senate is picking that up to amend that because it looks like Nigerians don't get that there's something like child rights. So that bill is going to put on stiffer penalties for abuses on children. I think those are some of the most critical bills and motions this week.
Mr. Oputa, thank you very much for giving us these updates from our legislative houses. Our guest on the conversation this morning is Mr. Daniel Oputa of Order Paper. He was giving us an update on the important motions to take note of, as well as some of the conversations that have been had in the Green and Red chambers. Keeping up with the National Assembly returns next week at this time on your Beyond the News station, Radio Now 95.3 FM. Do stay with us, as up next is the News Review.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM.
You're welcome back into the conversation. It's still Africa in Perspective here on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. This week on the conversation, we turn to Senegal and speak with Mr. Mamadou Chor. He is in Senegal, and we have spoken with him extensively on the situation in Senegal. Mr. Chor, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So last time we spoke with you, we were speaking prior to the situation that has developed in Senegal, a situation that has seen protests go through various parts of Senegal. The protests have been focused on the anger of the people towards the postponement of elections by President Macky Sall. Now, since we last spoke to you, what has happened in Senegal?
Yeah, what had happened is the unilateral decision of the president to postpone the presidential election due on February 25th. And what is the most tragic thing in the case is he waited until last Saturday, when all the 20 candidates was about to start the electoral campaign, to announce it at the middle of the day. And really, most of Senegalese were mad at him, because if there is something Senegalese are fond of, is defending the democratic model of Senegal, which is held in West Africa. When you look at the sub-region, how democracy is challenged in French-speaking countries, you look at Benin, what is happening there in Cote d'Ivoire. So Senegal was at least the last in the class to defend its democracy. But what happened last Saturday, made most Senegalese mad at the president.
Right. We saw protests and news of protests happening on Monday. There were protests as well on Sunday evening. And this week, we've also seen news of opposition figures in Senegal arrested and jailed because they supported the protests or they were at the protest grounds. Can you confirm to us if this is the actual case?
Yeah, some leaders of mostly the opposition party of Ousmane Sonko, who is currently in jail and who is very popular. Some of members of his party, among which some members of the parliament, they were arrested, but right away they were released. The big question is when the minister were gathering for the weekly meeting, the Council of the Minister yesterday, in the press release, the president said that he want, peace to come back. And he, told his Minister of Justice to make all his best to release political prisoners, because currently more than 1,000 people are in jail for political purposes, and most of them are members of the PASTEF party, with the party of Ousmane Sonko, which has been dissolved. And Yes, I mean, to that, we'll wait to see what will happen in the next days. But because the president said that he wants a national dialogue heading to the new date for the president election, meaning on December the 15th, because he wants the election to take place at the end of this year. But in the meantime, he wants a national dialogue, maybe to talk to everybody. Now we are waiting if maybe Usman Sonko is in prison, what he'll make of him, if he'll be released or not. Because no matter what you think of all these things, Usman Sonko has his say, because people consider that if the election takes place today, even if he is not candidate, the candidate chosen by Usman Sonko is likely to win the election.
And that candidate specifically, you mentioned, is also a member of his party. But you've also just informed us that Usman Sonko's party has been dissolved. How does that play out in the elections if they were to hold on the 15th of December?
Yeah, in fact, the party has been dissolved at the end of July when Usman Sonko was arrested. The same day he was sent to prison, they dissolved the party at the end of July. And since then, all the activities of this party is a problem for these members of the party, because the police forces don't want them to hold activities all around the country. But I mean, they are trying to do their best to continue, even if the party is dissolved, under new forms of activities. And the party is still very, very strong, because among the 20 candidate who was supposed to compete for the end of February election, the number 2 of his party, called Basiru Jomai Faye, who is himself in prison as Usman Sonko, was the one people see as winning the election, which means this party is, even if it's dissolved, is still a very strong party in the political landscape.
Right. So can you speak to us as to the mood of the Senegalese people at this time? Because we are seeing possibly an extension of tenure, at least by 10 months, of Macky Sall. And you have rightly reminded us that Senegal is one of the countries in Africa that has seen an uninterrupted civilian democratic rule since gaining independence. So what is the mood of the people? Are protests still happening across Senegal?
No, in fact, there is no way to protest, because there is a lot of police forces out in the street. Even if when they were, voting this law, postponing the election on Monday, anybody could not protest in Dakar. And as you remember, when we make a flashback, on June 23rd, 2011. So there was a big protest then, to bring the MPs not to vote a law most Senegalese was against us. But at that time, the then President Abdoulaye Wade allowed people to go to the National Assembly in front of and protest. And Macky Sall didn't allow this time people to do that. So that's why there's no way to protest. People are trying to make some protests, but as soon as you get on the street, you will, see police officers, and then they will arrest people, and then later on release them. The mood is very bad, but people, Senegalese cannot protest against, this decision, a very unilateral decision, and this is the first time in Senegalese history, politics, to see a presidential election postponed.
Mr. Chob, just before we let you go on this conversation, we're seeing the tenure of Macky Sall extended at least till December the 15th. Is there any chance that between now and then he might be able to repair his reputation to enable his party remain in power at the top of Senegal?
So when we look at how the international community is condemning his decision, maybe we are expecting, because his current term will finish on April the 2nd, starting on April the 3rd, most Senegalese consider that they won't be considering him as their president, because it means for the next 10 months they see him as somebody who is not legal and legitimate. So he'll be in big trouble starting early April. We don't know. Maybe in the meantime, what will happen, because there is a lot of pressure coming from the international community, the United States of America, even the ECOWAS. I mean, they release a second communique. I mean, telling the Senegalese authority to do their best to hold this election. And there is even a meeting in Abuja today of the ECOWAS to talk about the situation in Senegal. I mean, following this decision, which is very funny because Senegal was a champion telling this military coup d'etat in Mali, condemning them in Niger and Burkina Faso. And today, Senegal is on the hotspot, about electoral election in West Africa.
Mr. Cho, thank you very much for speaking with us today and on this conversation. Our guest this morning is Mr. Mamadou Cho. Mr. Mamadou Cho is the President of the Council for the Observation of the Rules of Ethics and Professional Conduct. He spoke to us on the latest developments in Senegal, where the presidential elections have been postponed for 11 months on the instructions of the President Macky Sall, as well as a resolution that has been passed in the Senegalese legal house. We'll continue with Africa in Perspective, where we bring you interesting facts about African nations. Do stay with us.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM.